And when people make these accusations, I have to ask them a question. Is the goal to make Trump look bad, or is the goal to get to the truth? Because there's two different sets of answers for that.
Okay, but sometimes they converge. Sometimes the truth is that somebody who says... Let's just go through the timeline, okay? Peter Navarro, somebody else who talks to Trump a lot, told him directly, January 29th, you got to get ahead of this. February 10th.
2 days later, he implemented a restrictive travel ban from China, which he was widely criticized for.
Nevertheless, President Trump did implement that travel restriction on January 31st, even though things like the World Health Organization were saying no need to limit trade and movement. And they largely criticized President Trump's travel restrictions.
That same day, on January 31st, Nancy Pelosi proposed the No Ban Act, which would be congressional limitation on what President Trump's actually able to do with that travel restriction.
Which would actually stop President Trump from implementing the life-saving travel restrictions that he did implement.
He said he stopped people coming in from China. He did not. He said he was ahead of it. 43 countries did it before we did. There are still people coming in from China. He only stopped foreign nationals.
Yeah, okay, let me address that, because I know that's what people are saying right now. But the reality is, it was about 40,000 people came in after that. These are U.S. citizens and green card holders and passport holders being repatriated. U.S. citizens. So you have to make the argument then that we shouldn't allow them in. I mean, it sounds to me like you're fully agreeing with President Trump on this when everybody else disagreed with him.
So was everybody else really sounding the alarm at this point in time? No, of course not. Headlines like these were being written, and constantly, and by mainstream outlets. Again, I don't blame them. These are the facts they had at the time.
Completely, let me stick to February.
Completely wrong.
Go forward, because you mentioned February 25th. The day before, February 24th, that's when the administration requested $2.5 billion from Congress to fulfill, CDC, NIH, and FDA funding to combat the virus and the potential spread of it. What happened right then? I'll tell you, because I was in Congress, but I know what happened. Did we vote on a supplemental funding bill? No.
So fast forward a couple of weeks when the president actually asked Congress for supplemental funding to combat the virus, $2.5 billion. What did Nancy Pelosi do? Instead of putting that money on the House floor to be voted on, she put a bill to ban flavored tobacco. That was the priority of the Speaker of the House.
By March 3rd, there was only 102 cases in the United States, and yet I'm hearing criticism that we should have been locked down weeks earlier. But would you think the American people would have accepted that with only 100 cases in the United States?
I also hear a lot of criticism for Trump being overly optimistic. But this is what Nancy Pelosi was saying in late February, telling people to go out and enjoy themselves for the Chinese New Year.
Come to Chinatown. Here we are.
Same with Bill de Blasio in New York City.
If we're going to criticize somebody's actions, we have to do it in the context of the facts they knew at the time. And so I'm just trying to be fair here. That I don't really care about defending him or his actions. I just care about letting people know the truth. And when people make these accusations, I have to ask them a question. Is the goal to make Trump look bad, or is the goal to get to the truth? Because there's two different sets of answers for that.
Listen, the narrative I've seen of late is this, that President Trump has blood on his hands, that they didn't do anything, that they denied the whole thing. And that's just not factually correct. I've created videos on this. We've been very vocal. I put this out in podcasts. We need to get the truth out to the American people. And when I was on Bill's show, he thought the same thing. So I just had to stop him and say, look, like, at every point in your timeline, there are other things happening that you're leaving out. And we just point those things out, you know?
Your criticism appears to be based in one thing, that Trump was overly optimistic. That's his style. You know, again, you can criticize it. That's fine. But it's not connected to the actions that we're actually taking.
This is the main point here. If we're going to look back in time and try to suggest that our government should have shut everything down back in February, well, where's the evidence for that? We were really going to shut things down when our cases hadn't really started to increase? When it barely started to increase in places like Italy or Iran? Of course not. They didn't shut things down until way later. Do you really think that we should have lost tens of millions more of jobs and livelihoods based on almost no evidence at the time? Is that really a reasonable expectation? Is that really a reasonable accusation? No, I don't think so.